The easiest way to trash your financial life as a PA, NP, or pharmacist is to screw up when buying a house. I'm Kristin Burton. I'm a critical care PA, and I went from $161,000 in student loan debt to a millionaire at 31. And I did it all while owning a home and having kids and traveling and doing all sorts of things that a lot of medical professionals want to do as they build wealth. So if you want to know the home ownership piece, if your aspirations are to get into a house in the next 1, 2, or even 5 years, keep watching so you can avoid making some major mistakes. The first thing to think about when you decide you want to buy a house is not, what kind of house do I want? Right? We're in the middle of building a house right now, and it's easy to first decide, what are my must-haves? What are my like-to-haves? Make that list. Go look around at houses and then set your aspirations from there. But this is one of the biggest money moves you will make in your entire life. Outside of the student loan debt you probably already signed up for, this is likely the biggest purchase that you'll make in the next 10 years, unless you become a real estate investor and you start doing this all the time like we did. Regardless, this is a very important money move, and the very first step is to actually figure out the money piece. So before you can decide what house budget you should be looking at, what houses you could potentially afford, you need to figure out, what is my max monthly housing expense? This is very simple math. First step, you calculate your household gross annual income. Gross means pre-tax. So you figure out, okay, for me and my partner, if I have one, how much do we earn on an annual basis? Then, step 2, take that number and divide by 12. This tells you your gross household monthly earnings. Step 3 then allows you to go that number times 0.2, 20%. This gives you your maximum housing expense, the most you should be spending per month on housing. If you're buying a house, that includes mortgage, which includes principal and interest, taxes, and insurance. If you're renting, it would include rent and renter's insurance. That's the most amount of money, the biggest cash outflow that you should have towards housing every month. Now, as an aside, when you're thinking about a mortgage being 20% of your gross, remember, that's your minimum cash outflow. That payment's guaranteed, okay? It's not going down. What is not guaranteed is all the extraneous costs that come with home ownership, right? The stuff that breaks, the water leak, the whatever that's not covered by insurance, all of that stuff adds to your housing output. When you rent, the opposite is true, right? That is your maximum monthly cash outflow, because if it's outside of your control, it's going to be covered by your landlord. And so the idea that renting is wasting money, I think, is a lie. And actually, it does helpfully put a limit on your cash outflow. Now, of course, the downside is that your rent can increase on an annual basis or when your lease ends, but at least for the duration of the lease, it does cap your monthly cash outflow towards this expense, which is nice. Now, from a mortgage standpoint, that number can help you determine the house budget, but only in the context of the type of financing you're going to pursue. That's the tricky part. Now, broad strokes, there's conventional financing, which typically requires 20% down to avoid what's called private mortgage insurance, or PMI. PMI is an extra fee that gets tacked onto your mortgage. That's essentially kind of money going nowhere. It's the lender's way of saying, hey, look, you don't have adequate collateral, you're a little bit higher risk, and so we're going to actually charge you a little bit of an extra fee in order to mitigate our risk in lending you money, okay? So that's PMI. If you have to pay, it's not the end of the world, but it's an extra expense. 20% down for conventional financing typically removes that from the equation, and a lot of times you can get it removed from your mortgage, even without a true refinance, once you pass that 20% equity mark. Now, you may be considering a medical professional loan. There's still a myth out there that these types of loans are only available to physicians, which is not true. There are plenty of lenders that offer these types of financial products to PAs, to NPs, to pharmacists, to dentists, to physical therapists, you name it. It may be trickier, and you may have to do more research, look towards local lenders. If you happen to be inside the Millionaires of Medicine Club, a totally free club, the link's below if you want to take a look at that. We do have resources to hook you up with lenders that provide medical professional mortgage loans to non-physicians, okay? So very possible, very doable. We've helped a lot of people do it. As a result, you can sometimes get in still for fixed. Some of those products are variable, but still often for a fixed interest rate mortgage with less than 20% down, sometimes even as low as like 3 to 5% down, and not have to pay PMI, which is really nice. And so some people will opt for that approach, especially the earlier you are post-graduation, end of training, the lower cash reserves you may have. And so you might end up feeling like a medical professional loan is a great place to start for that first residence because you can get into a home, less than 20% down, no PMI. Now, I'm not against that, but I would encourage you, if this is not your first home, this is an upgrade, right? Like you've been in your first home, you've been a medical professional for years, and now you're like, oh, we need more space, we want a basement, yada, yada. You really should have 20% equity in your home, okay? First house will cut you all the slack. I know how hard it is to get into a house in this market, and so by no means would I tell you, hey, you're horrible if you put 5% down. Very far from the truth. But when it's the upgrade, when it's the, well, we want the dream house now, you really should look to have 20% equity at that point. Okay, let's do an easy example so that we can see what this looks like from a max monthly cash output, and then also what this looks like when you walk through figuring out what house you can afford based on your financing structure. So let's say you have a household like 2 PAs, 2 NPs, 2 pharmacists, whatever. $240,000 is the gross annual household income. That means on a monthly basis, pre-tax, right, pre-everything, your income's $20,000 a month. Simple math, 20,000 times 0.2 means that $4,000 a month is your maximum housing expense. So whether, again, you're renting, that's your mortgage payment, principal and interest, plus insurance and taxes. If you're renting, that's your rent plus renter's insurance. Okay, that's the cap, is $4,000. So now the next question is, well, how much house does that equate to, right? Of course, the interest rate matters more than we'd like to admit during this higher interest rate environment that we're in, despite some rate cuts. And so what you could have afforded at a 3% interest rate, several years ago, looks a lot different than what you can afford now. That's the nature of the beast. Let's first look at what happens if you actually have 20% down. You have saved a full 20% down payment. If you're doing that structure, so this would be kind of conventional financing, 20% down payment, of course, your loan itself is smaller. And so your monthly expense to cover your mortgage will be smaller. Sample numbers. At that same household income, $240,000, you could actually afford a $550,000 house with 20% down and be well within that $4,000 a month cap. Now, 20% down in this case is $110,000 plus closing costs, plus moving expenses, right? And so you have to have a lot of cash saved. This might not be possible for a brand new grad. It may be possible after several years of practice and diligent savings, right? So that's what happens if you have a full 20% down payment. Well, what happens if you decide, hey, I'm newer into the game, I'm going to use a medical professional loan, put 5% down so I can have no PMI still. What house can I afford now? Keeping with that same $4,000 a month cap of your cash outflow, the amount of house you can afford drops because you have less equity to put into the house. And so now your maximum mortgage price decreases. It was $550,000, now it's $450,000, right, with 5% down. But your initial cash to close is way less. Your down payment cost dropped to $22,500, plus of course your closing costs, plus your moving expenses, but you're able to actually get into the house for a lot less and actually get started. You might not be able to buy the nicest house ever, depending on the housing environment that you're in. Some areas are obviously way more expensive than others, but you can still get started with less money out of the gate. Just remember, regardless, before you move forward with the house purchase, you need to have high interest debt cleared, that's credit card debt, that's high interest personal loans. You need to have an emergency fund of 3 months of expenses outside of your house down payment fund, and you need to have a plan for this. You need to know, well, if I want a $550,000 house, then I better be saving for longer because I need that full 20% down with this income, right? If I want a $400,000 and some house, well, then I should start talking to lenders because I could probably get in much, much sooner using a medical professional loan and have all of the numbers be very, very reasonable. This process takes a while. Don't forget, your focus cannot be your primary residence, okay? You have to remember that big picture, you need to build wealth. And when I say build wealth, that sounds like aspirational or something that could be optional for you. If you don't address your retirement needs immediately post-graduation, you will put yourself in a situation where you will be working past 65, 67 very, very easily. We're already late to the game. As medical professionals, we spend a lot of time in training, and so if you're not immediately investing, you're screwing yourself in the future. What you don't want to do is graduate, get hyper-focused on the house, maybe even just your student loans, put all of the investing piece to the side, because what will happen is you'll live in a great house and you'll work full-time in that great house until you're 72 years old, where you drop dead because you can't afford to do anything else. Okay, so the house has to be a piece of the puzzle. You need to have a student loan strategy or a debt strategy. You need to have an investing system. They both have to come together to create a full financial plan. And the house or the rent has to be just a piece of the puzzle that actually fits inside there. Now, if you don't want to do all this math and you just want a quick cheat sheet on like, okay, what mortgage can I afford? We have a free download for you. It's inside the Millionaires in Medicine Club. You can click the link below, get in, get access to that very, very easily. Remember, the big picture, becoming a millionaire in medicine is not an aspirational goal. It's a requirement for you to retire. And if you focus all of your energy on the house and miss the key pieces of investing that you need to be doing as well, you will end up regretting it in the future.